I would like to thank Rachel for introducing me, and I would like to thank the Commonwealth for inviting me to do this. And Montserrat is a very small place, 39 and a half square miles. It was until the volcanic eruption started, which started nearly 30 years ago, has given us some extra land. And because we are such a small space, we believe that we don't get opportunities to speak in situations like this. And you have to bear with me. It might just be that because we are from a small island, we believe that it might not be the truth. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I've titled the talk "Once Upon a Time We Had," and I've done that for two reasons. The first reason is that storytelling is a big part of our culture, and the second reason is that many people who have been through major disasters, whether they're man-made or natural, disasters which cause them to lose a lot, lose their communities and so forth, have a tendency to say, once upon a time, I had. I used to be, because the disaster loss changes people's identity. It changes with major loss of community and possessions. It tends to change the way people see themselves, and especially in relationship to others who might not have had the experience. So it's, it becomes a thing to assert that once upon a time you had, or once upon a time we had, once upon a time I was. So that's the major strap in the title. And then I said the impact of the Soufriere Hills volcano on the built heritage of Montserrat. And I'm looking particularly at the built heritage of Plymouth, which was the capital of Montserrat. Montserrat became a colony of England in 1630, and the first population, European population, first European settlers to be there were the English and the Irish. The Irish were there in larger numbers, and you had the Irish coming from settlements in St. Kitts, where there were conflicts between the English and the Irish. And then you had others who came from other locations. Some came from Virginia, some came out of South America. There were, adventurers who wanted somewhere to settle. Then, as a result of the settlement, you had Irish indentured labor coming into Montserrat. And to augment that labor force, you then had Africans, enslaved Africans, brought into Montserrat by the middle of, by 1650. Before then, the indigenous population of Montserrat that population consisted of the Tainos, the Loconos, and the Kalinagos. We are calling them by their names, their true names now. They were referred to before as the Arawaks and the Island Carib. And so Montserrat as a colony developed. It had it's a location where there've been many disasters and hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. In fact, an eruption would have happened not long before you had the 1630 settlement. So hurricane eruptions, earthquakes, floods. fires. And then you also had, during the early colonial period, you had the French struggling with the English for territory in Montserrat. And so you had French invasions, and built heritage was, was burnt down. You had attacks from the Kalinagos who burnt down, built heritage. And so it has been. So taking us up into more modern times, we had in 1989 uh, an major hurricane, and the Hurricane Hugo, um, hurricane, I'm trying to share my slides and somehow I'm not getting it done now. You solve one problem and you develop another. Uh,
Are you able to use the keypad, the arrows on your keypad?
Use the keypad. I'm doing up and down and everything, and nothing is happening.
Nothing's changing.
Uh, yes.
Yeah.
So,
I'm just
um,
wondering whether the slides are on your other profile.
yeah. Oh dear, dear, dear.
Right.
Yes. So anyway, this is a shame that I'm not going to be able to share the slides. So I'll just tell the story. We had a major hurricane in 1989, and it wiped out most of the housing stock of Montserrat. 99% of the housing stock was wiped out. It The colonial structures, though, in Plymouth and elsewhere on the island, they seem to have managed to forego the impact of the hurricane. So the housing stock were, modernized, and the new type of structures did not withstand the hurricanes. Interestingly enough, wherever you had small wooden buildings with hip roof, and these were mainly shops and rum shops. They survived, and that was interesting. There was a location in Montserrat where there were lots of rum shops on one side of the road and churches on the other side, and all the churches went down and all the rum shops left, and we were sometimes asked the question on whose side was God. But that it was all about architecture. And so the hurricane happened in 1989, and just as Montserrat was recovering, a boom of rebuilding happened. They had the volcanic eruption in 1995, and as a result of that eruption, only the 3/4 of the island is inhabited, and it's only a quarter of it that is inhabited. We've lost most of our population, who that had to be relocated to the United Kingdom and to the USA and other places. Plymouth, the capital, um, eventually most of the Plymouth got buried, and buried under about 50 feet of ash. So all the buildings, nearly all of the buildings, there are only a few that you could see just a little bit of what is remaining of them. And one of the buildings that have managed not to be fully covered, although it is severely damaged, is an Anglican church that we believe was built in the 17th century, was remodeled several times because of the attacks there was with the French, attacks from the Kalinago people by the building was burnt several times, and it has been destroyed in some parts by hurricanes, but it was intact in up to 1995, remodeled and was intact up to 1995. And we are now able to access the buildings, go near to it, and we can see that, the roof and other aspects, other parts of the building have been destroyed by volcanic material, but you could still see what used to be a roof. You could still see some of the pews that were damaged. The many of the you know things, ceremonial, plates and cups and furnitures within the building were taken out, thankfully, which is not true of a lot of other buildings in Plymouth. Many of the buildings went down with whatever was inside of them. It does not seem as if we are going to be able to dig our way, back into the streets of Plymouth. There, Plymouth is a buried city, and it's referred to as the Pompeii of the West Indies now, of the Caribbean now. But St. Anthony's Church is there, but it is in an exclusion zone. You're not allowed to go into that area unless you have had permission, which includes permission from the police, from the Montserrat Volcano Observatory, and the disaster unit. So the question of what to do about the built heritage of Plymouth, I think, rests with the fact that it is buried. However, in the course of this year, I have been running a program on Radio Montserrat, which is a program that is helping people to reminisce on Plymouth and to share their memories. And this is a live program, share their memories about Plymouth. And we started off with St. Anthony's Church because St. Anthony's is there. And the interesting thing is that a story went around about the fact that somebody went to St. Anthony's Church and dug and destroyed some things within the churchyard and so on. And so people became very concerned that whatever is left of that church should be preserved. As it stands, what really happened is that there were those who thought that the yard should be cleared so that it could become more accessible to tourists. And so we had those conversations about what was safe for people what was safe for viewers and safe in terms of the preservation of the building. And then people started to tell their stories about being members of the St. Anthony's Church community, going to church there. This happened over about 4 or 5 weeks, and it involved everything from talking about the church organ, and we had callers, coming into the program from the USA and from the UK who spoke about their childhood there at a time when the organ was not electrified, and they spoke about their time when they were the ones who were pumping the bellows for the organ, and they had information about the organ and who maintained it, and the organist and so on that was shared. And the programs were extremely popular. And what is important about this is that because the population of Montserrat is so dispersed now, this act of sharing, brought people together, and also there's so many people who have passed on since then. So the people who called in with information were actually supplying information that would not be accessible if a program like this was not happening. It then suggests the need for some big memory project relating to Plymouth, some big oral history projects relating to Plymouth. So, I mentioned the organ, I could mention the fact that they looked at church people who they regard as church characters. They looked at the stained glass windows, they spoke about all of these different things. And the fact that, St. Anthony's was just on the outskirts of Plymouth, and, walking from Plymouth to St. Anthony's, it gave people an opportunity to promenade, to express themselves in ways that they were not, able to do otherwise, given the fact that we are a colony, and we have to take it right back to the before emancipation, which was part of the conversation. There was a tamarind tree outside of the St. Anthony's Church that people claim that the enslaved who brought their masters and mistresses to church had to sit under, because there was a sign somewhere which said, no slaves or dogs are allowed into this church. So for the fact that people were able to reach the point where they claim St. Anthony's as a space, that they felt free to worship and free to congregate, the reminiscence, goes right back to that, and carried us into Plymouth, where there was St. Mary's Church, a chapel at East, an extension of the St. Anthony's Church, which was a school, and where they claim that the freed Africans actually put together all their bracelets and other bits of silver they had and created an chalice for emancipation. That has been secured. It's elsewhere now, so that is not lost. So we started at St. Anthony's, and from there it took us around Plymouth. We went through the different streets of Plymouth and the different buildings. We went into the courthouse, and the fact that the courthouse was also, the upstairs of it was used as a dance hall, and people spoke about the dances there, the fights there during dances. And it was, again, a very, very dynamic program with people calling in from all over. We looked at the market and what happened in the Plymouth market. Then the cinema, brought in many, many stories about the types of movies, the people who worked there, how the films were brought into Montserrat. Then, we went into the different street, Parliament Street, and there was so much said. What is interesting is that if my slides were active, you would have seen some of the buildings that used to be visible in Plymouth. The Montserrat National Trust has pictures of these, but what people calling in were able to provide at the little sideways where you had, little houses, you could almost say slum type dwellings that some people lived in that were not captured. So the memory of people is very important for us as we recall what Plymouth was about. And so we went up and down. We went up and down the streets. We went through the various buildings. We went to the War Memorial, and we had histories of the War Memorial brought to us by people who knew that history. And, we knew that it was constructed in early 1900s for a royal visit, and now it is totally buried. And the different events that happened at the War Memorial in the early 1950s, when there was a move by trade unionists for Montserratians to get the vote, and meetings were held there, and the colonial authorities sending a ship to arrest the protesters. That sort of information came up. There are people who remember things like that. And just outside Plymouth, there's a community called Wapping, where, again, it's all buried very near to where the government house, the governor's residence was. And what's interesting about Wapping is that we know the buildings that were visible on the main road, but the population behind those buildings was really, really vast. And the people calling in were able to provide the names of people, things that happened, what their trades were. And then it brought us up to the modern time, because Montserrat under the management of George Martin, who managed the Beatles, had established Air Studios of Montserrat, and Wapping was a place where a lot of those performances, performers, you know, went for restaurants and entertainment. And I could tell you, because I was a member of a jazz group that performed in that area, that Stevie Wonder actually performed there using our instruments. That's why I could tell you. So a lot of, so that history as well of the music industry in Montserrat is associated with Wapping, and also associated with the Plymouth that is buried. So there are many, many, many stories that are to be told about Plymouth, and which cannot be told through the built heritage anymore. We can't say, well, you know, we had visitors going to this place or that place. What we have are the people's memories that we need to tap into. We can't excavate to reveal the buildings anymore. We can try to excavate our memories. And the other impact of the eruption on the built heritage is how it's changed. And so now buildings in Montserrat, it started out after Hurricane Hugo, where there was an attempt to build hurricane-secured buildings. But since the volcanic eruption, most of the buildings in Montserrat, the housing stock, they're all square and flat roof, concrete roofs. And the windows, we used to have jalousie windows, we used to have louvered windows. People had to move away from that to windows that would ensure that ash did not get into the building. So I would say that, you know, the impact is one on the built heritage is that the architectural styles have changed as a result of the volcanic eruption. I forgot to mention one enduring structure which the eruption seemed not to have managed to do much with, and that is the sugar mill, the old sugar mills that came from the plantation, sugar plantation period. It seems to me that the mills being built out of volcanic material, out of the stone and the lime and sand of Montserrat, that the heat of the pyroclastic flows and the other materials that came from the volcano did very little to them. So they're standing. That's the only thing that stands without consumption from the volcanic material. They weren't in Plymouth. If they were in Plymouth, they would have been buried like everything else. So they're outside of Plymouth. The plantations were, you know, outside of the capital. And so they wherever they are, they seem to have endured. And I've heard a scientist say that he saw in St. Patrick's, to the south of the island, where the whole village seemed to have been wiped off the face of the earth, obliterated in an eruption in 1996. He said that they went in there and they found that an apartment that was in like a cellar type structure, that they met, you know, the table still spread and all the things they're secured, again, because the material that was used there was very similar to what is used in the sugar mills. So, you know, he opined that, you know, these structures could withstand nuclear blasts. We don't know that for sure, but that was a statement that he made. So, having said that, I'm thinking that perhaps there are some things that we might be able to, in time to come, dig out and restore. And you know, the technology might be available to do that. But for those of us who know Plymouth and who have visited it in recent times. And I was there a month ago. We took back my aunt's remains to be her ashes to be scattered there because she spent all her life in Plymouth. And you're seeing a place that it would take a lot of storytelling and imagination to have any new visitor to the area know that life existed there beyond the kusha trees, as we call them, that are now occupying the area. And I think I would like to stop there and allow for any questions.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Clarice. And I'm really sorry, everyone, for the sort of technical problems. Hopefully you saw some of the images. Thanks, Everson, for sharing those for us. That was really helpful. So does anybody have an immediate question? You can either just ask it or pop it in the chat. I may just start while everyone's thinking of questions. So Clarice, I believe that it's 30 years since the eruption this July. Do you know how it will be marked? Like what's going to happen thinking back over those 30 years?
In Montserrat, since the evacuation of people of Montserrat and the evacuation to the northern side of the island, which is the safe part of Montserrat, the Montserrat Christian Council holds a church service every year. So that is going to happen. And then the Montserrat Volcano Observatory is having a conference for 4 days. And they've been having these conferences during the 30-year period. They've had them 5 years on, 10 years on, and so forth. So that conference is going to happen as well. Elsewhere in London, there's a Montserrat, what is called the Montserrat Festival that's going to happen in London, where Montserratians living in London are actually doing a number of events that are planned. And there's a church service at Westminster Central Hall, and there are musical events, there are artistic events. One of them that sticks out in my mind is an attempt by one of our writers, Merle Roach, to bring a story about the Chance Pond mermaid. Chance's Pond was on it's the major mountain of the eruption of the Soufriere Hills eruption. Chance's Mountain, 3,000 feet high. At the top of it was a pond, a caldera, and there is a folk story about a mermaid who lives there. And if you catch her comb, in her hair, and you're able to secure that comb before her guardian, diamond snake, catches you as you rush down to the sea. If you manage to get to the sea before he catches you, then you become very rich. I used to say that I'm the mermaid because I come out of that area, and I lived I had just built a house at the foot of Chance's Mountain, hurricane secure after Hurricane Hugo. I lived for 2 years in it before the volcanic eruption happened. So I lost that house. And as a result of my location, I was one of the first people to report the eruption happening. And so now 30 years on, I'm still trying to make sense of all of this because so much has happened. And I took interest in the psychosocial effects of the eruption on the people on Montserrat and wherever they are. And my research has been on that. So I'll be continuing in that vein, and I'm interested in this 30th year for us to pay attention to the memories that people have of their various villages and other locations in Montserrat and experiences of the volcano.
Brilliant. Right, we've got some other questions now. So there's one from Duncan. who says, fascinating. Thank you, Clarice. If you have a choice and it was possible, would you rather it was left as it is as a ruined city, or see a few buildings restored as a place to visit, or completely rebuilt as a viable community?
That's a very good question. And seeing that my research is on the psychosocial effects, it's a really hard thing to think through something like this, given what we've lost. And as I was doing the slides, and I'm sorry that you were not able to see them, I found it really difficult emotionally to do that. And so Duncan's question sort of brought, I'm tearing up as he says this, because as he asked that question. It would be lovely to see restoration and to restoration, so that generations to come could have an idea of what happened there. And at the same time, I'm wondering if, as it is with things that are buried, if we shouldn't just leave things as they are. But I don't think things are going to stay as they are, because, with weathering and so on, more might be revealed in time to come than we might even imagine.
Brilliant, thank you. And we have Christina. I hope you don't mind me reading this out, Christina. So she says, my mother, Lillian Howes, was from Montserrat, and we took her ashes back to St Anthony's in 2022 and buried them there. It was romantically overgrown, but hard to find any of the graves, which are covered with prickly acacia trees. Is there a start to clear the overgrowth both here and in Plymouth?
There isn't a start, because the volcanic eruption is still happening. And as I've mentioned before, any entrance into Plymouth has to be, has to be sanctioned by the police and the MVO and the disaster management unit, and that's because that's for safety. There is some activity happening there, in that there's some, the exploiting of sand mining, the mining of sand and the exploitation of sand. It's happening through Port Plymouth. So there are people going in, and people going for touristic reasons, but it has to be under great surveillance. So we are not at the point where the acacia trees, the acacia trees would be cut down. And as I said, somebody took the liberty of clearing some of the trees from around St. Anthony's Church. And of course, people weren't too happy, because they wanted to be sure what was cleared, and that, no harm was coming to the structure, which is actually crumbling. I'm glad that Miss Howe was able to take back her mother's ashes and scatter them there. And I'm assuming that her mom was a member of the St. Anthony's community.
Great. And Christina's got another question. So there was also a lot of villas on the edge of the exclusion zone which seem to be surviving. Will there be a relaxation or constriction of the exclusion zone? So probably you've answered that in your last answer. It's probably no.
And I couldn't answer that, because that's that's a question that has to be dealt with by the politicians, in conjunction with the people monitoring the volcano. The eruption is still happening. And I would like to go back to my house, and, which is one of the areas overlooking Plymouth, and other people would like to. And you have people who are curious and who sneak in. It's very easy to do that by sea, and who sneak in other ways. But the advice is that it's not a good thing from a safety point of view. But we understand people's curiosity, and I have to admit that I left Birmingham in 1997. I went back to my house, and I walked over the buried buildings in Plymouth, and so that I could do that. And I got good pictures, and I had nightmares for weeks afterwards when I came back to Birmingham and started to look into exactly what I had done. And, you know, at that time, it was just a few months after you had the first burials of parts of Plymouth, and um, the material was still, you know, active. Fire was still there, and I could have crashed into a building through the you know what I thought was a secure surface into a building, and I would not have been here to tell the tale. So I'm sharing the story because it's not a good idea for people to go in without proper permission from the authorities, and there might be a time to come when things would change. And Montserrat is known as the land of the prickly shrub, which I think is this acacia. The Kalinogas call it Aliogana, land of the prickly shrub. So what is fascinating about all of this is now that the spaces are abandoned and it's going back into jungle, and the acacia tree is predominating, and the ferns, you know, when I went a few weeks ago, you know, it's Jurassic Park would not have you know, would not have is nothing in comparison to the reality of the jungle striking back. And that is sad. You know, it's beautiful, but I found it really sad as well, because in my mind, I still had the idea that one day that we will be able to return and I'll be able to go back to my house and all of these things. But when I see the way nature is reclaiming the areas, I could only say that, you know, all we have are memories, really.
You were saying earlier that it's actually quite fertile because of the ash. Yeah, so there's a sort of one positive, I suppose. Do you want to say a bit more, like you were telling me earlier about the fruit trees and how green it is at the moment?
So the material coming out of the volcano, the ash, it is known to improve the soil, and I have a feeling that was what made Montserrat attractive to the colonizers. You know, the Montserrat is very lush, and it's, you know, they're able to produce a lot, agricultural produce, you know, do very well in Montserrat. So in the early years of the deposits, when the ash was falling, it was burning down everything. There was acid rain that was coming, and along with the ash, and things were not thriving. But at this point, 30 years on, Montserrat is very, very lush. There's a greenness that evades imagination. And I made a reference to Jurassic Park. And I sent a picture out to a friend the other day who wrote back to say to me, you have a lot of green paint in Montserrat, because, you know, the pictures just seem unbelievable. So you know, there's a lot of mangoes around right now. The population is not large enough to eat all the mangoes that they are. So they're just rolling down the hills practically. And that's because I believe it's because of the ash deposits. And so it's not only mangoes, it's cashews, it's guavas, it's everything that is thriving. And Rachel said that's one positive. I don't believe that's the only positive. We have the only buried city in this part of the world, and that provides opportunities in time to come. And, you know, some of it is already been explored, and, you know, and we are put in a position, the experience that our people have had of living with an erupting volcano, and the memories that we have now to tell, the stories that we have Now to tell, to me, that's a tremendous resource. And, you know, it's not everybody who has had the privilege to have had those experiences. So we miss Plymouth. We've lost Plymouth. And we've lost that built heritage. And we have had an opportunity to experience what it is like to lose at such a fundamental level.
Thank you.
And I'm thankful that I've had that experience. I think it's a plus, you know.
That's
We
good.
speak about Montserrat people as being resilient as a result of how we have approached the experience. And in the, you know, that we've reached 30 years and that we're looking back, we could see the signs of resilience, very much like the sugar mill that is enduring, and that it seemed to be improved by the heat of the volcanic eruption, and the soils that are now showing us in all its greenery that the eruption is necessary. And we know eruptions, wherever they happen all around the world, are needed as part of the earth replenishing itself. It just so happened that we were in the way because we were settled there. And that should cause us to raise another question about the way, about built heritage and whether structures in our parts of the world could ever be regarded as being there forever, or should they be like the structures that the first people, the indigenous people, made, that were, temporary. They established settlements and they moved on when things became difficult. That's not to say that nature didn't catch up with them, because in Montserrat, we know that some First Nation people were consumed in the earlier volcanic eruption because we found some of their remains. Yeah.
Thank you, Clarice. There's one last question from Duncan, which is more about the other existing buildings. So question about the historic timber buildings in Montserrat, elsewhere on the island. Are they generally being conserved, or are they being lost to new concrete and steel buildings?
Most of the timber, it was timber and stone buildings we had in Plymouth. So most of those are gone. And though most of the plantation buildings will be gone, except for the sugar mills. So yes, timber buildings are not commonly found in Montserrat anymore. When people are building out of concrete and they're building box-like structures, because they're trying to build structures that will withstand the natural disasters, which have become very apparent to us. Hurricanes, when you build in wood, I know that provisions could be made for hurricane, resistant roofs, and materials could be used, hurricane straps could be used, and so on. But people are still very concerned about living in structures that will withstand hurricanes. Some might say that building in concrete might create a problem as far as earthquakes are concerned. But what do? We are living under a volcano. We are living in a hurricane belt. We've had disasters like these throughout our history, and we could only do the best we can. My own home, I tried to copy the stone and timber structure, and every year at this time I begin to get a bit jittery because I don't know whether I might lose the upstairs of my house. Most people don't bother to take that chance, and of course it's also very expensive to insure.
Yeah, no, the insurance is a really difficult issue, isn't it, in countries that are affected by hurricanes. Well, I think that's everybody's questions, unless anybody else has got a final question. I think, you know, it's been a really fascinating talk, Paris. Thank you so much. We've learnt loads about Montserrat and the kind of lost area of it, the lost abandoned places within the island. So we've just got one more comment from Christina. I agree that the population of Montserrat is impressively resilient and maintains a strong sense of community, creativity, humour and spirituality, despite undoubted hardship there. I hope that the profits generated from the sand mining will help to facilitate the regeneration of this very special island. Thank you, Christina.
Thanks for that comment. And I'm hoping that whatever support could be offered from the Commonwealth Heritage Forum for the creation of the memory projects and the oral history projects, you know, will happen, because I get the impression that support will be given for the restoration of buildings. But here is a situation where the building is in the mind, in the memory. And that's where the support is needed right now in Montserrat.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I'll just pop in the chat, just a reminder that we've got many more talks in this series, all about lost and abandoned places across the Commonwealth. So please do join us for some of those other talks. We've got another Caribbean talk coming up about Jamaica and various places within Jamaica that have been sort of lost and abandoned, and various other talks as well. So there's lots of thank yous coming through, Clarice. I don't know if you can see the chat. But people are saying, thank you, very informative, really good to hear of your experience. Thanks for sharing. Thank you for all the best ongoing endeavours. And Samantha says, thank you, Clarice. I'm very excited to return to Montserrat in July. I've not been back since 2019 during my graduate school work. So, and another thank you. So yeah, thank you very much, Clarice. That was a really amazing talk and I really learnt a lot. It was very interesting. So thank you.
And thank you very much.